Good afternoon and welcome to episode 44 of the Jacksonian. As I'm yours truly, Jackson Johnson, and I have with me is the co-publisher of OUInsider at Rivals, the publisher of Minor Insider at Rivals, and the host of KREF Sports Radio, Parker Thune, as we'll be going over quite a lot about the Oklahoma Sooners going into the 2024 season, the recruiting class of 2025, the schedule, what it's like joining the SEC, Jackson Arnold, and much, much more. And let me tell you something, folks, it's going to be a wild ride. How you doing today, Parker?
I'm doing great, man. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. Before we start off the show, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
A little bit about myself, huh? Well, gosh, where to start? I'm a graduate of the University of Oklahoma, so came down here for school. Grew up in Nebraska. Came down here to go to college and never left. Ended up launched into a full-time career covering the Sooners my junior year of high school. So, I shouldn't say no, junior year of high school. That would have been wildly premature. Junior year of college. I got started in media as a freshman in high school, working at a local radio station here and there, just getting familiar with the operations, how to produce good audio, what all the ins and outs of broadcasting requires on a very functional basis, and then was really, really blessed to come to an awesome journalism school at the University of Oklahoma and learn some amazing things over the course of my time there. Things that I think about what I knew after I graduated versus what I knew coming there. I was 100 times smarter and more technically proficient and just well-versed in all things journalism when I graduated than when I showed up. I felt like I already knew quite a bit when I showed up. And I quickly came to realize, no, don't know much of anything. But did as much as I could for the 3.5 years that I was there to set myself up for a career in sports journalism. That was kind of always what I aspired to. And that's the path I've been on ever since. I've been full-time in the industry for going on 5 years now. And it's been an awesome time. Love covering Oklahoma. Love covering UTEP as well. I've been blessed to build some really good relationships, camaraderie with players, coaches, peer journalists, plenty of people across this industry that are really, really good folks. It's a fun community to be a part of.
There we go. And I will say, though, as of filming this episode, we're in the beginning of August, the first month of football since February of 2024. That it's going to be amazing right there. And we're 5 weeks away from kickoff for the Oklahoma Sooners, but 3 weeks away from week 0. So that's going to be fun right there. And how are you feeling about week 1 so far?
Well, week 1 for Oklahoma, it ought not to be much of a contest. They host Temple on August 30th. It's a Friday night game. It's at home in Norman. Temple is kind of a beleaguered program. I don't know. I'm not sure they know who's going to be their starting quarterback come week 1. Generally, the Sooners, at least, this has been the trend in years past, that week 1 game is typically just a tune-up. That's what I expect Temple to be. In years past, that week 2 non-con matchup, and in some cases week 3, there have been some good solid contests and ones that have borne some intrigue going in. But really the only time I can remember in recent memory that the week 1 contest was even a game for Oklahoma was in 2021 when they hosted Tulane. That was a 40-35 final. And that obviously was a Tulane team that ended up being a lot better than most anybody expected. I think they went 2-10 that year, but then they turned around next year and went and won the Cotton Bowl over USC. So in general, week 1 it's pretty much a nothing burger for Oklahoma as far as competition is concerned. It's a game you expect to win against an opponent that doesn't really expect to challenge you, at least not realistically. So that's my general feeling on week 1. Should be a nice opportunity for Oklahoma to get tuned up for the gauntlet that lies ahead in the SEC slate.
Oh, yeah. So I know that the first one, it's gonna be like a awkward situation. It's kind of like awkward exes, like that randomly run into each other at a pool party. Because you see, Oklahoma going up against Tennessee. This is the first time since Josh Heupel got fired that he's making a return to Norman, Oklahoma. And I know that later in the year we're going to see Shane Beamer make his return to Norman for the first time since he left for South Carolina. I kind of wonder how they're feeling about it.
Yeah, I think everything is pretty cordial on both ends as far as Shane Beamer is concerned. OU knew, obviously, when he was on staff that he was destined for a head coaching job sooner rather than later. And when he got the opportunity at South Carolina, he was a consummate pro about the way that he left, and OU encouraged him, hey, go take that opportunity. And all in all, he's done a pretty good job there. The Josh Heupel situation is a little bit more awkward because he did lead the program to a national championship in 2000 as the starting quarterback. And the older generation of Sooner fans remembers him primarily for that. They remember him as the quarterback that led the program to its first national title in 15 years. And in fact, as we sit here today, their most recent national title. But the younger generation, they don't know Josh Heupel as the national championship winning quarterback of 2000, the guy that came in from Snow Junior College out in Utah and really set the stage for the Bob Stoops era by serving as the starting quarterback for those first 2 seasons under Stoops, the second of which culminated in a title. They only know him as the offensive coordinator that came back to Norman in 2011, had 4 modest years, and ended up getting fired in favor of Lincoln Riley at the end of the 2014 campaign when it became clear that Oklahoma's offense was a little bit stuck in the mud. So I know there have been that whole situation between OU and Heupel and the vibes there have just kind of been awkward ever since. I know on Heupel's end, I can promise you that's a game he has circled. Getting fired by your alma mater, getting fired by your former head coach, the guy that you played for in college, understandably, that's not something that is ever going to sit quite right with you. And in credit to Heupel, he was. I'll call a spade here. The Sooners were justified in letting him go, but by the same token, the path that his coaching career has taken and the way that he has rebounded from that over the decades since has been remarkable. And it's a testament to who he is, his acumen as a coach and as a play caller. So Hype has done a tremendous job rebuilding his career in the aftermath of the firing at Oklahoma. And he, in many ways, is exactly where I think he, in as good of a situation as he could have possibly hoped to be in a decade ago, at the being the head coach at a place like Tennessee, where he's getting paid a hefty salary, he's got a lot of job security, and
no state taxes in Tennessee, so that's a win there.
I suppose so. I didn't know that, but yes.
But yeah, like that October slate from 2000, that was definitely a huge turning point for Bob Stoops' second year in 2000. I mean that ending, that wild ending in the Red River rivalry against Texas. I mean that was huge.
In 2000?
Yeah.
In 2000, that wasn't even a game. Oklahoma blew Texas out in that game.
Oh yeah, that was like. And I know that they went up against Kansas State, Nebraska that year.
That's correct. So, yeah, they spotted Nebraska a 14-point lead at home and buried them from there. Scored 31 unanswered to win that game. And Kansas State, that was a hard fought.
Oh, I must have been thinking of that 0-1 game where which one was it? It was the one that had the pick six.
Superman play. Yes, that was 2001.
Yeah, that was one. I had my years mixed up, obviously. I was like, good grief. I'm so sorry. But we also see Oklahoma having to go to Jordan Hare, and that's always a place of trouble for top 25 teams.
It certainly is. And Jordan Hare voodoo is something that everybody in the SEC talks about. something that, everybody says you kind of got to experience it before you can fully comprehend it. And on paper, that's a game that Oklahoma should win. But I don't think it's one that anybody here in the OKC market, and certainly not this fan base, ought to be taking for granted. And I don't think it is one that they're taking for granted, because if you've watched football at Jordan-Hare over the years, and I've watched many an Auburn game through my TV screen, crazy things happen at that place. And that feels like the prime trap game on Oklahoma's schedule. That one, and then South Carolina on the other side after the Red River Showdown. Those are the two games that, again, if you break it down on paper, OU ought to beat both of those programs. But the harsh reality is you can't look past anybody in the SEC.
No. I mean, Auburn looks like that perfect trap game, because like they could be caught thinking about Texas a little bit, or thinking about that Tennessee victory. Next thing you know, Auburn possibly upsets them. So that's a perfect upset alert game right there. I mean, I remember like last year, everybody was knocking down Auburn after that loss to New Mexico State. And they're like, they're going to get spanked by Alabama. I'm sorry, but have you seen the stats against Auburn and Jordan-Hare for Alabama? Doesn't end well for them. The naysayers learned a lot last year. At least I hope they did. And I see that Maine is on the schedule, but I see that Missouri is back on the schedule. How you feel about that Oklahoma-Missouri game?
Yeah, there ought to be a lot of vitriol that's encapsulated in that matchup between Oklahoma and Missouri, because the Sooners obviously lost their highly prized freshman guard, Caden Green, to Missouri via the transfer portal. And that was a situation that, understandably, many in the Oklahoma camp were not thrilled about. They felt like there was some stuff that went on under the table between Missouri and Caden Green. Whether that is true or not, it's not my place to say. But what I can say is there's definitely some beef. I mean, that's perhaps the most basic word, but that's as simple as it is between Oklahoma and Missouri. There's more beef than you would figure between two teams that haven't seen each other in over a decade. But there's quite an interesting dynamic between those two fan bases on social media. I know that there are many in that Oklahoma locker room that have that November 9th date circled. There are many in that Missouri locker room that have that November 9th date circled. So that should be as chippy a game as Oklahoma plays in 2024. That's my expectation.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be an underrated game compared to Georgia Ole Miss and Alabama LSU. But it's going to be a great game, none other the less. We see those final 2 weeks, Alabama and LSU. So it's been a long time setting up Oklahoma LSU. Like I remember it was going to be played in the 2010s. No, it was going to be played in the 2020s, and they moved it out to some other decade. But now that Oklahoma's in the SEC, we can finally see Oklahoma LSU and play each other on rivalry week. I gotta say, it feels a little weird seeing that game on rivalry week. But how are you feeling about it?
Is that rivalry week, November 30th?
Yep.
Interesting. Well, I mean, it's a game. I think it is. It ought to be a game that both of those fan bases have a little bit of added motivation going into, because they both kind of have a distaste for one another. Not dissimilar to the situation between OU and Missouri, but this dates back to OU and LSU's matchup in the 2003 BCS National Championship game, where that game was played in New Orleans, obviously, and there were a lot of Oklahoma fans that went down there. And the word is, I wasn't there. I was only a tyke at the time, but the LSU fans and the Oklahoma fans were not exactly simpatico with one another over the course of that contest down in New Orleans, which LSU eventually won 21-14 under the leadership of Nick Saban. So it ought to be a fun atmosphere for a fun finale, regular season finale for both of those programs. I kind of expect it to be a night game at Tiger Stadium to close out the regular season. It ought to be, if both those teams live up to expectations in 2024. It's a fun game to have on the schedule. It is a little odd, and it'll be a little odd for a few years seeing Oklahoma play the likes of LSU in conference play and just getting used to the new digs in the SEC. But if you're going to come down the home stretch for the regular season and have a chance to really make a statement towards the end, close it out with a flourish, you can't ask for two better games to conclude your regular season than Alabama and LSU.
Yeah, I mean, if Oklahoma goes 10-2, they're in the playoffs, and that creates a lot of momentum where there are people doubting Brent Venables. They're not going to be doubting him now.
Yeah, and I don't know how many are doubting Brent Venables. Oklahoma did win 10 games last year in year 2 of his tenure as head coach. So there were plenty of doubters after year 1 when the Sooners went 6-7. But I think, especially with the benefit of hindsight, many regard that season as a blip and not a trend. And I think the Sooners are poised for more success this year. Do they win double-digit games? Maybe, maybe not. It's a tough schedule. It's a schedule that doesn't really give you an opportunity to come up for air. Once you're in, and you got to grind every single week. You got to take every single opponent seriously, and you're going to have to play 60 minutes of consistent football in order to get past anybody. Now, I will say there's nobody on the schedule for Oklahoma that is clearly objectively better than them. Oklahoma is more than capable of hanging with and beating anybody on that schedule, but is it realistic to have that expectation in the SEC? Certainly not. I think anybody with a reasonable perspective would concede that there are probably at least a couple of losses somewhere along the line for Oklahoma, because that's just the nature of life in the SEC. You'll win some games you shouldn't win. You'll lose some games you shouldn't lose. And it's going to be a meat grinder, start to finish.
Yeah, it's pretty tough in the SEC. And, now that we've seen the schedule, what's your record prediction for the Sooners for this year as of August 1st, 2024?
I have them at 10-2. I think they
10
finished 10-2 on the year. I think the game that they lose that they shouldn't lose comes at Auburn. I think the game that they win that most would say they probably shouldn't win would be that home tilt versus Alabama. I think those two teams are closer to one another than most others would tend to believe. I think, and I'm not expecting a huge regression for Alabama as they flip the page from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer. I do think that's still going to be a very good football team, but Oklahoma gets them at home. And there are people who are much smarter than I am that have expressed concerns as to whether Jalen Milroe and his style of play at quarterback is going to mesh immediately with Kalen DeBoer and the offense that he intends to run at Alabama. So all those things in mind, I think the Sooners win against Alabama at home and what some may consider to be an upset. I think they win the Red River Showdown against Texas. I think they beat Missouri on the road. The two losses on the schedule that I would speculate to occur as of right now, August 1st, I think they drop one at Auburn, and that's kind of their welcome to the SEC. You can't escape the weird Jordan hair voodoo, or Jordan hair. I have to remind myself. Jordan, not Jordan. Jordan hair voodoo. And then I think going on the road to Ole Miss is going to be tough. That program is going to be very, very strong, both offensively and defensively. Ought to have one of the best defensive front fours in America. I can't really, in confidence, pick the Sooners to win that game. So the losses that I have penciled in, not necessarily sharpied in, but penciled in right now, would be Auburn and Ole Miss.
Well, I've got Oklahoma, unfortunately, going 9-3, at least for now. But I've got them upsetting Texas like you do, because I kind of figure that Red River rivalry magic is going to come against Texas.
Well, and I don't even know whether I would consider that an upset if Oklahoma wins that game, because take a look at what Texas lost from last season when Oklahoma beat them at the Cotton Bowl versus what Oklahoma lost. Oklahoma returns the vast majority of their production on both offense and defense. They brought in some key contributors, Deion Burks at wide receiver, Dominic Williams at defensive tackle, etc. Texas lost 11 dudes to the NFL draft, 11 starters. I mean, but to replace guys like that, to replace guys that depart your program and are good enough to get drafted by an NFL organization when there are only 250 and change picks to be made over the course of an NFL draft, that's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah, that's going to be ugly for the Longhorns, but we'll definitely see what happens with them going into Michigan in week 2 because they're going to need some of those stars to come back. Hey, you got an extra day of eligibility. Want to come back for another day? But in all seriousness, so when that contract extension happened for Brent Venables, how did it feel?
How did it feel? I mean, it was kind of to be expected.
Yeah.
You're confident that Brent Venables is the guy to lead you in the SEC. You want to be able to make sure he has enough of an extension on his contract that you can confidently, or I should say that he can confidently pitch to the recruits that walk in his office that he's going to be there at Oklahoma for the entirety of their collegiate careers. And that's something that he can truthfully say, hey, I'm planning on being here. They're planning on me being here for the entirety of the time that you're here in Norman. The extension carries his contract through the 2029 season. So it was a 2-year extension, basically just hitting the reset button. His initial contract was a 5-year one. And to extend it by 2 years means that he's getting at least 7 years, unless he's fired at some point before then, which I don't anticipate. I don't think anybody in Oklahoma anticipates it right now. If he does what he ought to do as head coach with the talent that he has on the roster. But they're just basically hitting the reset button saying, hey, those 2 years, forget them. And that's the Big 12. We're moving on to the SEC. We're going to let you start from scratch. You have 5 years from here on forward. And whatever you're capable of doing over the course of those 5, well, I guess technically 6 seasons when you consider 2024 still technically in front of us. Whatever you're able to do over the course of that time, we'll reevaluate at some point down the line. But this is the initial commitment that we're making to you as we get ready to move into the SEC. Use it to your advantage in recruiting. Use it to your advantage in the portal. But in today's day and age, Jackson, if you want to win and you want to sustain a winning tradition in college football, you have to be able to pitch stability to players that walk in that door, whether they are recruits, whether they are transfers. If you're trying to acquire talent, one of the things that will go the furthest with these kids is the promise of stability, because a lot of them don't want to get in the transfer portal. A lot of them don't want to bounce around. A lot of them just want to be able to commit to one school, put down roots, play a whole collegiate career for the same brand, the same school, the same logo, and the same coaching staff.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're saying I promise be there for the next 4 years, but then next year it's I'm out. Their players are just going to go, I'm out of there. I mean, I know one school that can't really promise stability as of right now, North Carolina with Matt Brown. I don't think he's got long in his coaching career after this year.
You know, I'd be tempted to agree with you, but people have been saying that. I know I have said that about Mac in the past. He just keeps hauling, man. Just keeps hauling.
Yeah. I mean, he's fun to watch, but, you know, I don't know how long he's got, but it'll be interesting to see what happens next. But the Oklahoma Sooners in the 2025 recruiting class are 7th. So what do they need to do to get higher? Like, what are the additions they need to get?
Well, they're still in pursuit of 3 top targets, 3 guys that are national top 100 recruits. 5-star offensive tackle Michael Fasusi, with whom they're battling, or for whom they're battling Texas. Andrew Babalola, 4-star offensive tackle from Overland Park, Kansas, for whom they are battling Michigan and Stanford. And then 4-star linebacker Christian Jones from Omaha, Nebraska, for whom I should say they're battling the in-state program, the Cornhuskers. So that's really it for Oklahoma. I think on the large scale, they're content with what they've put together. They've got 22 commits in the class as it stands. They would love to get that number to 25. They'd love to have Fasusi, Babalola, and Jones. I feel confident that they're going to get one of Fasusi or Babalola. I don't think they get both right now. I think that's probably a pipe dream. I think they get one of the two, and then ideally you close out the class with one more linebacker. The goal is for that to be Jones right now. Could Oklahoma go further down the board and take a look at and maybe make some late evals at the linebacker position if Jones elects to stay home? Sure, but I think the benefit of the transfer portal in this day and age is that it gives you an alternative to having to go further down the board. You don't have to go eval a bunch of 3-stars at linebacker and try to find a hidden gem when you know good and well that as soon as the season is over, you're probably going to find some very qualified, very experienced linebacker talent in the transfer portal. Some plug and play guys that you'll be able to get in the system with 2-3 years of eligibility left in an ideal world and just let them off the leash. So I don't think Oklahoma will make any more offers in the 2025 class right now. I don't think they will pursue any other prospects save for those 3 that I mentioned for whom they are still actively pushing.
Well, I will say that one of the strengths I've been looking at is obviously the passing game. Yeah, I mean, it was a huge gain with Dylan Gabriel. Now that he's gone to Oregon, it's Jackson Arnold's turn. Can we see him become another one of the quarterback greats in Norman, Oklahoma?
He's got the talent. There's no question about it. He's got the arm strength. He's got the accuracy. He's got the athleticism. Ultimately for him, and this is the case for really any quarterback that is as highly regarded on the recruiting trail as he was, it's about decision making. Is he going to be able to make smart decisions with the football on a consistent basis? That was kind of Spencer Rattler's undoing a few years back when he was the starting quarterback at Oklahoma. He had all the talent in the world, and I think now that he's with the New Orleans Saints, I believe he was a 5th-round draft pick. He's certainly got what it takes to be a long-term NFL starter, but his undoing at Oklahoma and the reason why he had to go take a couple of years to bounce back at South Carolina is because the decision-making was a weakness in his game, led to his benching in favor of Caleb Williams. And so for Jackson Arnold, I think in his lone start against Arizona in the Alamo Bowl at the tail end of last season, you saw some really encouraging flashes from him. You saw him hit Brennan Thompson on a deep ball down the field. It was just a beautiful, beautiful throw. You saw him fit some throws into tight windows. You saw him flash that velocity, flex that arm strength, not only the ability to push the ball downfield, but the ability to zip it, get it to its intended destination quickly in the short game and in the intermediate game. But then you also saw some freshman moments. You waited too long on a couple of throws, tried to put a couple of passes where they probably didn't belong, ended up throwing 3 interceptions in that contest. And so it was a very mixed bag for Arnold. But the good news is he's had, by the time he takes the field again against Temple on the 30th, he will have had 8 months to sit and watch the film and analyze every aspect of his performance against Arizona, learn what he needs to learn, jot down what takeaways he needs to jot down, and then apply that on the practice field to be able to be a more polished and more effective quarterback when his time comes in all of its fullness in the 2024 season. And when the Sooners hit the field on August 30th, it's go time. I mean, the program is in Jackson Arnold's control at that point. He officially takes the reins when the Sooners open the 2024 campaign. So I think there's a lot of confidence that Jackson Arnold can be one of the greats and the next guy to carry on the decorated lineage of great quarterbacks at the University of Oklahoma. Time will tell, but for him, it's just all about decision making. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing more of Jackson Arnold going into 2024. It'll be fun watching them. But how do you feel about the SEC? Like, what's something you miss out of the Big 12? It was something that you're happy about now that you're not in the Big 12 anymore?
You know what? I will miss some of the Big 12 road trips, some of the Big 12 destinations. Always loved covering games in Manhattan, Kansas. Kansas State is an awesome place to watch a college football game. Uh, Same thing in Waco. I always loved trips down to Baylor. There are quite a few destinations in the Big 12. Morgantown, West Virginia falls into that category as well. That's a trip you got to make at least once in your lifetime as a college football fan. But I think most everybody involved with the Oklahoma football program would tell you they're not going to miss a whole lot about the Big 12. OU made the transition to the SEC for a reason. It's because if you want to play with the big boys on the biggest stage in college football come the end of the season, you want to be competing for college football playoff titles year in and year out, man, you got to be battle tested by the time the playoff rolls around. And the best way to get battle tested is to play in the deepest and most competitive conference in America. And in years past, Oklahoma's been to the college football playoff on 4 different occasions. They've never won a college football playoff game. Been one and done each time, 2015, 17, 18, and 19. And the reason is because when they got to the playoff, they lost to 4 different teams in the college football playoff. It was Clemson in 15, Georgia in 17, Alabama in 18, and LSU in 19. What's the common denominator with all those programs? They're unquestionably, over the last decade, 4 of the most successful and consistent programs in all of college football. 3 of them are SEC foes, and the 4th, Clemson, especially at the time, they were the most SEC of any non-SEC program. And so for Oklahoma, I think it was really easy to see that filling up your regular season slate with that slew of Big 12 opponents, Texas Tech, Kansas, Baylor, Iowa State, and what have you, that just wasn't really preparing Oklahoma effectively to be able to go toe-to-toe with an Alabama or a Georgia or a Clemson come the end of the season when you hopefully, ideally, made the cut for the college football playoff. And Oklahoma's most recent CFP experience was in 2019 when they just fell victim to an utter demolition at the hands of Joe Burrow and LSU. That final score of that game was 63-28. It was an embarrassment for Oklahoma. And so I think the mindset, especially with Brent Venables at the helm, is, hey, we're going to run to the fight. We want the smoke. We want to be part of the most competitive conference in college football. We don't want to hide. We don't want to cower. We don't want to run the opposite direction from the very best competition that this sport has to offer. And so that's the mindset. That's the onus behind the move to the SEC is, hey, let's make sure we're best positioned to compete for championships across all sports, but especially football. The best way to be prepared is to play the best week in and week out. And that's what Oklahoma is going to get to do in the SEC.
So what you have to do is play the best. Play the best of best in all college football. Always helps. And what are like the weaknesses that we have to look out for going into 2024?
I think there are many that are interested to see how Oklahoma's offensive line gels. They have to replace all 5 starters from a year ago. They brought in several transfers to help anchor that unit. Branson Hickman from SMU is going to be the Sooners starter at center. And he's going to kind of be the key cog in the machine, if you will, as any good center is. And the Sooners have Fabechi Wiwu, formerly of North Texas, to play right guard. The one guy that they do retain that wasn't a starter for the majority of last season, but does have starting experience is Jacob Sexton, who's expected to inherit the starting role at left tackle. There's a lot of promise there. The pieces are there for Oklahoma. The guys that they brought in via the portal are all starters. They're all guys that, they aren't speculative takes by any means. They're guys that Oklahoma has reason to believe, based on their body of work, based on their respective resumes, that they can play at a high level, the highest of levels. They can play SEC football. And for instance, Branson Hickman played in the AAC. Fabechi Wiwu played in, what is North Texas in? The Sun Belt. And so these
They're
guys,
now in the AAC.
North Texas is, gosh, I've lost track. Realignment is nuts, but
It's insane.
these guys are taking a jump as far as the level of competition, certainly, but there's enough of a body of work at their previous institutions that you have more than enough reason to believe that they're capable of making that jump. Branson Hickman, for instance, 33 career starts, second team All AAC guy at SMU last year. So the offensive line, provided it comes together, provided Oklahoma has strong play in the offensive trenches, that's really the Achilles heel for this team. That's the one thing that it feels like they've got to get figured out. There ought not to be any other weakness on this roster, barring injuries. It's all about how the offensive line performs.
That's all it takes. If you have a great offensive line, you're going to be all right. If you got a good offensive line, you'll be good to go. But if you got a horrible offensive line, it's not going to end well for you. No. But as we wrap up episode 44 of the Jacksonian, for those who'd like to look at Oklahoma recruiting and news and notes, where can they find you?
OUInsider.com, folks. That's the place to be. Also, download the KREF app. I'm on air every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Central Time. So those are the two spots where you can find my work. I know we talked to all of you. If there are any UTEP fans out there watching this, then hey, MinerInsider.com on the Rivals Network is the only network-affiliated site on the internet dedicated to coverage of UTEP football and recruiting. And I'm proud to carry the flag in that regard for my friends out in the 915 at the University of Texas at El Paso.
Well, as for me, you can find me at Jackson Johnson 979 right here on YouTube. And you can find me on X on Jackson09960335 and on Instagram and Threads at Jackson Johnson 543908, where I give my takes on the latest of what's going on in college football, NFL, pop culture, so on and so forth, and also give my updates on who's coming on the Jacksonian as well. And for next time, this is Jackson Johnson wishing you all a happy day and stay safe, stay cool, stay away from the heat.